Welcome. On today's episode, we have Dr. Wendy Patrick. Let's get started.
From the front lines of violence prevention, digging into the details that matter. Get ready for a 15-minute fast-paced information download that will prepare you to ask the critical question. When disaster strikes, are we good? Now, here's Jim Bennett.
Dr. Wendy Patrick is a career prosecutor. She's a musician. She's an instructor. She is an expert in behavioral threat assessment, and she brings so much to the table here. She also is a public personality. We see her a lot on Fox News, Nancy Grace, CNN, many of the local stations in Southern California. We see her out there, and we are so excited to have her as part of our show today. She has a great past with us here at Belanti.net as a contributor to many of our classes and programs, for which we are immensely grateful. She's also an author. Her book, When Bad Looks Good, is certainly a popular one out there. Highly encourage you to read it. Red Flags, How to Spot Frenemies, Underminers, and Toxic People in Your Life. Great book, as well as her Reading People. All right, welcome, Wendy. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Jim, for having me.
Absolutely. So recent research shows many organizations still struggle to recognize, when domestic violence becomes a workplace issue. What are some of the earliest warning signs that employers, threat assessment teams seem to be missing?
Well, some of the signs they seem to be missing have to do more with behavioral change than anything else, because it has long been a stereotype that every domestic violence victim is going to present in the workplace with bruises, with long sleeves in the middle of summer. Some of the more stereotypical symptoms we've heard about, not that those still don't exist and they can't be visible. But oftentimes when you know your employees, think about it very practically, you know when somebody's behaving differently. And one of the biggest red flags is when somebody really doesn't want to talk about the why, because there's still a stigma associated with being an abuse victim. We wish that weren't the case, and we think we've come so far and it's okay, and we're able to sort of destigmatize being an abusive relationship, but that is still not the practical reality, especially for victims that worry that bringing drama into the workplace, if you will jeopardize their own jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I've seen that a lot through my career, where there's that worry, that crossover between, is this going to put me in a position of jeopardy for my job? Because there's also a lack of understanding on their part. Is that not true of what could my employer do if I'm kind of bringing this into the workplace?
And that's the fear, is there going to be collateral damage if the spouse or partner or angry ex-boyfriend shows up at the workplace with a gun? Or the angry ex-girlfriend. Certainly, I've spent my career prosecuting domestic violence, and both genders can be both perpetrators and victims.
That's right.
But it's that fear of the unknown, and employers know about that too. So one of the things that employers can do is have really good, well thought out, well delivered, and memorialized workplace violence policies. Now, we know that's occurring more and more, and those things are updated every single year because of the prevalence of digital abuse, for example, of the kinds of ways in which coercive control, which, as you and I, Jim, and our viewers no doubt know, is one of the hallmarks of domestic violence. That degree of coercive control can be present both physically as well as digitally. Social media is one of the places where victims are often targeted, abused, threatened, the kinds of things that employers and coworkers worry will also translate into people that the victim works with. This is not a new phenomena, but many abusers seek to learn more about what the victim is doing, where they're going, through people that know them. So coworkers, colleagues, employers, work schedules, the kinds of building employment practices. Where's the security? Where's the front desk? Do they have bulletproof glass? Where's the parking lot? All of these safety measures been around for a long time, But as abusers become more tech savvy in terms of being able to keep tabs on a victim, for example, employers have to keep pace as well.
Yeah, good points. Let's go, and I want to dive into those a little bit further down the road here because there's a lot to talk about with that. But backing up for just a minute, just for our audience's value here, can you kind of break down this coercive control? Because it's certainly I don't recall that being a terminology that we used years ago on investigations and whatnot, and now we've kind of moved into this era where that's a pretty common comment. Can you kind of break that down for us? What does that look like?
Yeah, you're talking about the evolution of nomenclature, which is a wonderful thing to be able to have actually identified what the components are of domestic violence that you can't see. Coercive control, it's this idea that you're controlling the behavior, the actions, the thoughts of a victim, sometimes simply by fear. Threat assessors often recognize that the best individual to give a threat assessment is a victim, because the victim knows, for example, moods of a potential perpetrator. They know triggers, things that will set off an abuser. Coercive control is that ability to control a victim without doing necessarily anything physically. So occasionally we see relationships developing where there is no physical abuse. In fact, that's one of the things I teach on is that how do you recognize a coercively controlled relationship, which, by the way, very frequently escalates into a physically abusive relationship. But those early signs of coercive control are often visible through the emotional presentation, if you will, of the victim. And that is something coworkers do notice. It's that fear and anxiety when a particular ringtone occurs on a phone. The ringtone no likely belongs to the abuser. The victim gets up from an important meeting to take a phone call in private, where that's completely inappropriate and no doubt why the abuser phoned at exactly that time. So these are some very significant red flags that should alert others in the workplace that there is this coercively controlling relationship. Now, there isn't a penal code section that criminalizes coercive control, and that is the insidious way in which domestic violence progresses within a relationship. Is there are plenty of behaviors, of coercively controlling behaviors that themselves don't violate any existing penal code sections. So it may be frustrating to me as a prosecutor, but it's dynamite evidence in a workplace in order to be able to track the progression of a potentially abusive, toxic relationship and make sure that there are safety precautionary measures in place if, God forbid, an angry abuser shows up at the front desk, at a side door, having stolen the victim's access card. All of these kinds of things we worry about when we see these red flags of a coercively controlling relationship.
Well said. Yeah, I know. I think that so much of it has changed over time. And like you said, it used to be just this philosophy of like, do we see physical injuries? Do we see bruises, those sort of things? And now as abusers have evolved, we'll just say, they're finding little ways to put their tentacles into the situation that are avoiding criminal statutes. Sometimes they're avoiding certainly detection by others. But it's that awareness and observation that we have to have there to pick up these other more subtle approaches that abusers are using towards their victims in the workplace. I want to transition for just a minute here because this is a hot topic still. We still talk about the pandemic. You know, we were deep into it for all those years, and we pulled out of it, but there's still the residual. And one of the points of it being residual is certainly the hybrid and remote work environment. We have so many people working from home. How has this changed the dynamics of domestic violence risk assessment? What's the difference now?
The difference is we can't prevent what we can't see. And that was one of the things we worried about the most during the pandemic is we weren't available to see the potential victims in person. So even if there were bruises, we couldn't see it. We also, unless you're talking about a Teams Zoom call or anything where you're required to keep a camera on, we also couldn't sense it remotely. Now, let me give you a few caveats as to why, Jim, that point is so important. Some employers believe, for very well-intentioned reasons, that maybe a potential victim needs time off. What, time off at home with the abuser? No, and that's a problem in many workplaces where employers are struggling to figure out how we can ameliorate or improve a potential victim situation. Now, I say potential because remember the stigma. Many victims are unwilling to admit, even if there are visible signs of distress that are being reported by coworkers. I mean, a victim comes in, looks like she's been up all night, her eyes are puffy, looks like she's been crying. I mean, all of these signs, and if we know the person, we know there's been a behavior change. Something's going on behind the scenes, but they're unwilling to talk about what that looks like. So the last thing you want to do is send somebody like that home to spend more time with their abuser. But there are other options. How about different work schedules? Maybe a schedule where the victim won't have to be walking across an empty parking lot late at night with low lighting. Maybe it's a schedule that will allow a victim to be able to get home before traffic or get to work early or whatever it is. In fact, why not ask victims what would be the ideal work scenario, workplace hours? If that flexibility is possible, sometimes that's the best of both worlds, because we often talk about, and you've heard this, I mean, we've been talking about this for years, even before there was such a thing as digital abuse. Domestic violence is the invisible, silent epidemic. But silence is not golden if you are a potential victim. So if you're an employer seeking as to how you might change a work schedule to accommodate a victim without re-traumatizing them by requiring them to disclose private details, that's a conversation that probably should be driven by the potential victim in letting the employer know what would make his or her life easier on the job. They can do that, by the way, without revealing the details of whatever it is that's going on at home, which again may not include any physical abuse.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important approach, is that blended approach. We don't know all, and we are, as employers, we're not always going to have the very best process or structure to supporting them. We need to listen to them as well. And I think that is important. And certainly there's going to be hesitation from them on several fronts. But if they're willing to say, you know, if I worked swing shift instead of day shift, that would help me out a lot. Great. We need to listen to that. Obviously, we need to listen to it through a filter of what's important from our viewpoint as well as an organization, protecting our staff, et cetera. But I think listening to the victim is extremely important. So many times these organizations hesitate to get involved in the personnel matters, or not the personnel, I should say the personal matters, right? Is that they're just hands off, like, hey, I'm wondering if this is kind of crossing too far into another lane that we're not supposed to be in. So not asking for true legal advice here, but just more kind of big picture here. What legal obligations or protections do employers have when they become aware of domestic violence affecting their employees?
Well, very generally and broadly. I mean, we all know there are labor code sections that require employers to maintain safe workplaces. And to that end, you see many employers doing exactly that to the extent that they can control their own threat assessment and their own workplace violence procedures. For example, you see many workplaces have security. They have lighting, and the lighting is maintained. Lights burn out outside the building, they're replaced. They have doors that work and locks that work. I mean, how many of these school shootings have we seen where there was a door that the lock was broken or a window was open? Or I remember the Aurora, Colorado school shooting where the perpetrator came in and then propped open a door to the back of the theater where the guns were brought in. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which employers already know where some of the points of vulnerability are, and they can shore up those points of potential vulnerability. So regardless of what type of threat or potential threat they become aware of, they're able to maintain secure premises. Now, we all hope that anybody goes to the law enforcement if they become aware that a crime has been committed. And we hope they do that sooner rather than later so law enforcement can memorialize the observations of witnesses. What did somebody see, hear, tone of voice? You want to make sure you gather the surveillance video footage from the common areas before you either damage it, destroy it, or God forbid, record over it. How many times has that happened? So becoming aware, knowing what to look for, where to look, and then what what you do with the information you receive, that is one of the ways employers can ensure that they maintain a safe premise for everybody. And that's also true when it comes to having a policy that allows employees to know and gives them guidance as to what they're supposed to do if they witness concerning behavior.
So true. Great advice, great information. I always hate this part of the show, but we're out of time. And I want to thank you, Wendy, just for this conversation. Look forward to having you back in future episodes. And certainly, we're going to continue that conversation that we started today on domestic violence in the workplace. And I look forward to that down the road. So again, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
But here's the good news for all of our listeners is that this isn't the end of the end here. We are going to be going into the squad room. So join us as a member of the Good Squad at arewegood.net, and you can see the rest of this conversation where we'll dive a little bit further into what we've already started to talk about. And there's always going to be more, right? And that's why we're going to have Wendy back in future episodes. So again, I want to thank you, Wendy, for being part of this today. I want to encourage everyone, again, jump into the squad room with us at arewegood.net. And there you can also see some of our offerings from Belanti.net to support your efforts in creating a safe workplace in your organization. So please take a look, arewegood.net. Thank you, and don't forget to ask that important question. Are we good?